Welcome to the Dispatch Podcast. I'm Steve Hayes, joined today by Jonah Goldberg and Mike Warren to talk about two big stories in the news. The continuing discussion about Iran, Israel, and the United States, the attempted destruction of Iran's nuclear sites and possibility of regime change, and also the New York City mayor's race, which had some interesting results and surprising results, I think, to many people. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Hello.
I like the schoolmaster beginning to the. Everybody has to say good morning.
Yes, Mr. Hayes.
So we are.
We should tell people we're recording on Wednesday morning for breaking news purposes, schedule purposes, harmonic convergence of the planets, a whole bunch of different reasons.
Right. Wednesday morning, a little before 10 a.m. We're going to release this, we think, later today, and we'll catch up with the news. I want to start with Iran. Mike, it's been 4 days or so since the U.S. Ran a series of attacks on Iran's nuclear site. A lot of back and forth about whether those attacks were effective and the extent of the damage that those nuclear sites took. Can you bring us up to date on what's happened since those evening attacks on Saturday night and where we are today?
Right. So Saturday night we launched this attack on these three nuclear facilities. Listeners to the Dispatch podcast will sort of be up to date from the previous episode of the roundtable on kind of what happened over the weekend. But at the end of it all, it appeared that these three sites were, bombed to smithereens. Whatever that means, we still don't know. But the claim from the administration was that they were destroyed, and this was a big sort of victory for the United States, for Israel, against Iran's nuclear program. And the president suggested that that was going to be it. And there was by, I believe, Monday evening, there was what the president described as a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran after Iran had retaliated, a pretty perfunctory retaliation on launching some missiles at a American base in Qatar, which it was a little ironic because Qatar is considered an ally of Tehran. The government of Qatar appeared to have gotten a heads up about that attack, as well as the United States. This is all the indications were that this was a face-saving response from Iran, and of course all those missiles were intercepted. No lives were lost, no casualties at all, and then the ceasefire commenced. You had this moment where sort of, I don't know what it was, 6 or 8 hours between the announcement of the ceasefire and the actual commencement of the ceasefire, in which there was some additional back and forth between Israel and Iran, and Iran launched an attack basically just outside the window of when the ceasefire was supposed to take place. Israel responds. The president gets really upset about this, drops an F-bomb on the on the White House lawn before he heads off to the G8. He seems to be pretty frustrated with he seemed to be frustrated, at least, with the status of this war. He seems to be looking for it to all be over, and for the attack on Saturday to sort of have been the last real strike, or the last real effort. Since that sort of back and forth right after the ceasefire was supposed to begin, as far as I can tell, it's basically been quiet. But here we are. The question, I think, at this point is now a question of analyzing what that Saturday strike actually did. And we could talk a little bit about this. I'm a little reticent to read too much into these leaked intelligence reports. But there is a question now, I guess, about how far back those attacks set back the Iranians in their nuclear weapons development program. It was initially suggested that it had been obliterated. This intelligence report from one intelligence agency leaked to the media suggested that it had not been set back as far as the administration maybe had initially claimed or initially hoped. I just think there's still a lot of fog clearing before we know what happened, but now we're in the analysis phase of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good wrap up of the past several days. Jonah, Donald Trump is at NATO summit. He was seated next to the Secretary General earlier today. He was asked a question about the intelligence and just how effective it was. You remember the evening of these attacks, the president came out and his supporters came out, his cabinet secretaries, and said this was executed perfectly, devastating attack, destroyed everything. There's nothing really remaining, declared victory, and said this was one of the most successful strikes in the history of mankind. Trump was asked about this morning, and I want to read what he said, at least part of his response to a question about the state of the intelligence. He says, "The intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe, the damage to these nuclear sites. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct, but I think we can take the we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration."
What is unclear about that, Steve? Come on.
That's the quote. I mean, I think in the president's own mind, again, somebody who said earlier that this was a tremendously successful attack, he doesn't know. He's hearing these intelligence updates. As Mike mentioned, we had this leaked assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency suggesting that, in fact, it was not as devastating as the president's early rhetoric might have had us believe. Do you have any sense, Jonah, where we are, and if not, how long it'll take us to get a real battle damage assessment?
Yeah, we should also say that the DIA thing, on its own terms, said it was low confidence, right?
Right.
Which is sort of code for this is our first best guess with limited information. And our former colleague and friend Klon Kitchen had a good post on Twitter this morning explaining how BDAs work, battle damage assessments work, and it's you gotta put together a whole bunch of different ingredients, right? You have to do the signals intelligence where you listen to what the Iranians are saying amongst themselves, discounting for the possibility that the Iranians that you're listening to may not actually have perfect information either because it's chaos and fog of war, and B, that they may assume you're listening, so they may say things that aren't true, and then you do satellites, and it's best to have human eyeballs on things, but that's very difficult in a country that you do not control the ground on, and so who knows? So I actually suspect that the DIA report is wrong, and that the damage was worse than that. Just in part from the experts I've been paying attention to, they talk about how those centrifuges are very delicate machines, and you don't want to bump into them when you're walking down the hall because those are so finely calibrated. And I just kind of feel like a dozen bunker buster bombs might, shake them a little bit. But again, I do not know, right? So I'm also deeply, deeply skeptical. You hear a lot of Democratic politicians and similarly situated journalists talking about how we have no idea what happened to the enriched uranium that may have been carted off by truck. It is 900 pounds, right? 400 kilos, whatever it is. I don't do metric. And I believe that we don't know. I am deeply skeptical that the Israelis don't know. Because if the Mossad doesn't actually have a team that is dedicated solely to trucks that go in and out of Fordo, I would be shocked, right? And so, the New York Times, Mark Mazzetti, and like 35 other people on the byline had a good piece doing the TikTok of how this all happened, and they make a pretty good case, or they are pretty suggestive that Trump really made things more difficult for the military by blabbing about a whole bunch of stuff and signaling that this was actually going to happen. And so I think Trump may deserve a lot of blame for the fact that some enriched uranium was moved prior to the attack. At the same time, I don't think that uranium is just in the wind now. I would be very surprised if the Israelis don't have eyes on it. So I think it's one of these things you just got to sort of wait and see. My theory about the Trump and the obliterated thing is, in part, he always cares more about the headline and the stagecraft of things than the substance. So that's sort of baked in as part of Trump's approach to this. But I also, we've talked about this a couple times before around here. I was talking to Jeffrey Goldberg on the Remnant about this, no relation. I think if you listen to Trump this morning from NATO, he also had this bit about how he was comparing it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He said, the last thing I want to do is compare this to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I think it's a lot like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? And insofar, and his point was that it just knocked them out of the war. They're never going to try this again. And I hope that's true. The whole case for a regime change is that you can't think that's true because these guys believe they're on a mission from God to have a bomb and destroy Israel. And so I'm skeptical of that, but that's his position. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is I think a lot of it is Trump's natural P.T. Barnum spin stuff and all of that. But I think there's an element of it that comes from his sort of Norman Vincent Peale prosperity gospel upbringing, where he's trying to convince himself. He is trying to self-actualize and bring his desires into reality. So, like when he says, my estimate of my net worth depends on how I feel that day, he wasn't kidding. That's how he sees the world. He thinks that he can will the reality he desires into being, and I don't think any of us can completely fault him for that view, given how successful he's been with this nonsense. And so when he keeps saying, I think it's been obliterated, I think part of what he is saying is, I really want that to be the case, and if I keep saying it, like the January 6 guys are all patriots, all that kind of stuff, it will become true. And
the kids call that manifesting.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a great thing in a commander-in-chief, but I do think it's something that we should keep in mind.
It will become true, or at least true for the people who hear him and are
which is a kind of truth
believe
to
him. Believe him, right? I mean, he shapes the reality among his followers, and they hear him say it. And they hear him say for 3 straight days, supported by Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance and all of these others, that this place has been obliterated, that the threat is in effect over, that Iran and Israel are going to make nice with one another. They believe that, and as often as not, they don't then get contradictory information. So they're either not seeing something like this leaked DIA assessment, or if they're seeing it as yet another leak from a politicized intelligence community meant to bring down Donald Trump. And I think Jonah, your invocation of January 6th is spot on, because that is a scenario in which, literally we have more than 40,000 hours of video of these people wreaking havoc in the Capitol, attacking police officers violently, destroying the building. And there is now this sense among a certain percentage of Trump supporters that they were the victims and that this really wasn't that bad. And, they're patriots. And Trump does have this sort of uncanny ability to shape reality in our, siloed information economy so that his people believe what he says. The other example, and I know I've mentioned this one before, was back in the first term when the House of Representatives passed the Obamacare repeal, and Trump then had a ceremony at the White House celebrating the end of Obamacare.
Right.
It hadn't passed
beer.
the Senate. It
Right.
hadn't done anything. But they literally had the Marine Corps band playing songs. They had a press conference, a big celebration. Everybody congratulated one another on the end of Obamacare. Well, Obamacare never ended. But for people who wanted to hear that message, that Trump had come in and done what he said he would do, they were very receptive to it. And I think reality catches up, but sometimes it doesn't have the effect that we might like.
So there's another angle which I just think we should put a pin in. The Trump administration bootstrapped all sorts of legal arguments for using the Alien Enemies Act for immigration stuff, on the argument that Tren de Aragua was essentially the Hezbollah of the Venezuelan government, that it was a proxy organization that invaded the United States and is at war with us, and therefore we are justified to do all of these things, including deportation of people who have no association with Tren de Aragua. And the National Intelligence Council put out a report saying, not really true. The Tren de Aragua is Venezuelan, and the government kind of likes that it's screwing with us a little bit, but they're not
Turns a blind
agents
eye,
of the government, all that kind of stuff. And they fired the two top officials for this, along the lines that you were talking about, how, they're enemies, they're deep state enemies, screwing with our messaging and undermining the president. But they also happen to be telling the truth. And, that is my concern here, is that whatever the motivations of the people who leaked the DIA assessment about Florida was, I am concerned that the word is going to go out that you better not produce any intelligence products that contradict the Donald Trump's manifesting, and that is how you really undermine national security.
Well, this is also a failure of the leaker, whoever leaked this initial DIA assessment, because, I mean, just everything you guys have just discussed is contained in Caroline Leavitt's statement to CNN when CNN was the first to break the DIA's thing. And let me just read it real quick, because it just sums everything up. This alleged assessment, although they did acknowledge that the assessment was real in the sense that it existed and that they had seen it, but put that aside. This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community. The leaking of this alleged assessment is a clear attempt to demean President Trump and discredit the brave fighter pilots who conducted a perfectly executed mission to obliterate Iran's nuclear program. Everybody knows what happens when you drop 14 30,000-pound bombs perfectly on their targets. Total obliteration. And I'm with you, Jonah, that I think actually this assessment's likely to be incorrect, but whatever the goal of the person who leaked it was, maybe it really was to sort of undermine Trump, or to sort of to demonstrate that he was sort of talking bigger than what the assessments were going to reveal. It seems to have. It's likely that it's going to backfire on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of these. If you look back at the last 20 plus years of interplay between elected officials in the intelligence community and these kind of leaks, I mean, I guess my own view is a pox on everyone. You have a leaker like this, where I agree with our former colleague Klon Kitchen. It's really early to do any kind of exhaustive, definitive battle damage assessment, and Klon pointed out that any such assessment would bring together signals intelligence, human intelligence, circumstantial evidence that we get from liaison intelligence services, all of these things that it's hard to imagine we have sort of in an instant. And you just have to understand that that's why these are labeled low confidence assessments. When they're made, they're asked to give an early guess as to where we are. That's what this is, and then it's leaked, and people make more of it than ought to be made more of it. This happened during the battle over Iraq War intelligence repeatedly, where the famous one was, sort of a footnote from the State Department's INR intelligence agency that called into question some of the reporting on Iraq's chemical and biological weapons. Now, they turn out to have been right, but this was used by critics of the Bush administration, the Iraq War, to say, hey, the intelligence community knew that Saddam didn't have these weapons of mass destruction, and therefore the policymakers lied about it. Because, see, it on this one footnote by the State Department, they raised questions about the legitimacy of this. So I think we can sort of spin ourselves round and round until we actually know. One thing I do expect that we will hear more about in the coming days, and I'm interested in your reaction to any of this. I remember reading, I think it was Bob Woodward's third book about the Bush administration, and it was a look back on the Iraq War and the intelligence. And Woodward was famously pretty well sourced in the U.S. intelligence community, and he opens one of the chapters with a very colorful interview that he does with an anonymous U.S. intelligence source, when Woodward asks, how many human intelligence assets did we have in Iraq on the ground before the war started? And the guy says something, and this is, I'm paraphrasing from memory here, says something to the effect of, you can count them on one hand and still give someone the finger, or something like that. And the subsequent analyses done by the Senate Intelligence Committee and others of Iraq pre-war intelligence suggested that we were really blind on human intelligence sourcing in the days leading up to the Iraq War. And, just in conversations I've had with people who understand kind of the state of our intelligence about Iran, its nuclear programs, its proxies, the way that the IRGC works, we are, I don't know if it's quite that bad, we lack human intelligence sources on the ground in Iran. And that will have potentially profound implications for just how much we know. Now, human intelligence sources are good for many reasons and also unreliable for other reasons. They're problematic, but some of the best intelligence comes from human intelligence. If it turns out we haven't had the kinds of human intelligence sources on the ground as we undertake something as consequential as these attacks, do we risk going through sort of the same cycle where people are saying, look, this is the U.S. government telling us that we had this information, that we knew this stuff, and it turns out to have been either thinly sourced or maybe not true? Is this potentially yet another moment where we see decreased faith in institutions as a result of this? If, and again, all of this is conditional, right? A big if it is in fact not the case that we obliterated these things and Iran was not racing for a bomb. Mike?
It's a worry that I have in just about every aspect of government and civil society these days, is a lack of faith in institutions. And the problem, if we just think back to what it was like in the months and years after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and just the chipping away at trust for very good reasons, and in many cases for unfair reasons, but regardless, and this was at a time when, the country was, 9/11 was still a very real and vibrant memory for Americans, where the president was viewed as someone in general trustworthy. His approval went up and down, but nobody except the most anti-Bush partisans thought that he was just a liar out of habit, in the way that we know that Donald Trump is. So I think you have this added element of the person at the top being someone that just everybody knows, and even, I mean, I guess take out the most pro-Trump partisans there are. Like, even a lot of his supporters would probably understand that, yeah, the guy fudges stuff. Like, they would probably admit that. You add that to a sort of what I think has happened since in the last 20 years, which is just with, I think, the proliferation of the internet, the way in which I think bad foreign actors have infiltrated social media in various ways. There's a lot of noise and a lot of bad information, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, that taken as a whole undermines and continues to undermine trust in institutions. If we have if our takeaway from all of this in the next weeks, months, years is that the intelligence community, or the disagreements between the intelligence community and the White House and the communication of that was incorrect. People were lying about it. I mean, it is just a continual decline. We're just going to be that much further down the graph on the chart of lack of faith in these institutions. Throw it on the pile is what I say. Like it's another data point, and it doesn't. It brings me no pleasure to say that.
Yeah.
So I agree with the broader thrust of the point. I agree with everything that Warren says about the general omnibus lack of faith and trust in institutions and contempt for experts and all that stuff. That's a real problem. This very well could feed into it. I want to push back on an embedded assumption in the original question, because I just wrote a column about this, just had a long talk with Jeffrey Goldberg about this. When we were growing up in Washington, every single time there was any talk about military engagement, you could count on the New York Times to use the word quagmire and talk about Vietnam. And I looked it up 20 years ago. I reprinted it in the column I just wrote this week. Where to start? So 3 weeks after we started dropping bombs on Afghanistan, which was on October 7th, 2002, Johnny Apple, who was like, the dashboard saint of foreign correspondence at the New York Times, wrote an essay for the New York Times, "A Military Quagmire Remembered, Afghanistan as Vietnam."
Ooh.
And then he writes, "Like an unwelcome specter from an unhappy past," Apple wrote, "the ominous word quagmire has begun to haunt conversations among government officials and students of foreign policy, both here and abroad. Could Afghanistan become another Vietnam?" And then moving forward, this is me. "Over the next 12 months, the newspaper ran nearly 300 articles with the words Vietnam and Afghanistan in them. The New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times ran articles mentioning Iraq and Vietnam, and at an average rate of more than 2 a day." Now, the reason I bring that up is, like, if you watched the Sunday shows, as I did this week, the good news is Papa Bush thought he had purged the Vietnam syndrome with the first Gulf War. He was wrong, because it came back with a vengeance during the second Iraq War in Afghanistan. But Bush the Younger purged the Vietnam syndrome and replaced it with the Iraq syndrome. And we now have this obsession with, is this Iraq again? And it's not just on the left. It is definitely not just with the elite media. It is also with Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and all of those guys too. And everyone is doing anti-Iraq war cosplay. And so many of the assumptions and comparisons, I mean, Kristen Welker, I don't mean to signal her out, but like, she was clearly trying to get J.D. Vance to sort of buy into the idea that we went to war in Iraq with false intelligence, and we're doing it again because there was no. Tulsi Gabbard said, and Senator Warren affirmed that the intelligence hasn't changed about whether or not the Iranian program was imminent. Where they had an imminent bomb. Let's concede that intelligence doesn't exist, that Trump is lying, just straight out lying when he says, I think they were very close to having a bomb. As I said last week, Jimmy Crack Gordon and I don't care, right? We have every right to bomb the crap out of Iran for the thousands of Americans they've killed over the last 40 years, and the fact that every week they scream death to America, but more importantly, whatever the validity of that intelligence was, about whether that it's imminent or not, and Bibi Netanyahu claims they have new intelligence. He's also been saying for 30 years they're minutes away from a bomb, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. It doesn't matter, because no serious person on any side of this debate, it means you're unserious if you deny that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. So any comparison to Iraq fails immediately there. It also fails immediately when people start talking about occupation and boots on the ground and all these kinds of things. And when Tucker starts raising all of these phantasms about how thousands of Americans are going to die in the first week. Where? How? Who? What Americans? There are no Americans in Iran. Right? It is just the Iraq war. We can debate all day long about good idea, bad idea, where were the mistakes, where were the failures. I stand by passionately that the real intelligence failure was not understanding how to do phase 4. It wasn't the WMD stuff. It was, how do you stand up a new government? How do you deal with a society that had been so compartmentalized and deracinated by a terrible dictator? And we completely screwed that up. And that gets to your point about not having human intelligence on the ground. We don't really know a lot about the Iranian society and what comes next if the regime topples and all that stuff. I think that's all perfectly legit. But the people who want to make it sound like, it's a little bit like Watergate syndrome for journalists, right? Is they all want to be Woodward and Bernstein, right? And they always like, what did they know and when did they know it and all this kind of stuff. And that's fine to a certain extent, but in another way, everyone is, if all you're doing is saying, oh, it's Iraq all over again, you're going to miss some really important distinctions that are both good for Trump and bad for Trump, or irrelevant to Trump but important to this actual issue. It is just not a replay of Iraq in any serious way, except, as Warren pointed out on our editorial meeting the other day, they do share 3 out of 4 letters.
Well,
thank you for revealing my very deep and trenchant analysis, Jonah.
It's the smartest thing Mike has said since he's come to the dispatch. Let me push back a little bit, Jonah, because I can imagine people listening would say, yeah, okay, so Johnny Apple was maybe a little premature. 3 weeks in, early to call it a quagmire, definitely sort of hearing echoes of Vietnam where they may not have existed then. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we were in Afghanistan for nearly 2 decades. We left with an inconclusive and embarrassing exit. Some of the intelligence there was wrong. Our handling of the post-war period was fraud and sometimes ill-informed. Point to Iraq. There was mission creep. There was bad intelligence. There were times when our political leaders did say things that we later could show were not true. I mean, sure. If you want, I take your point, and I think I basically agree with you. But if you want to look for things where there were parallels, you don't have to really nitpick to get there, right? I mean, Iraq was the same way. No?
Sure. If you want to say, well, Vietnam, we screwed up Vietnam and we screwed up Iraq, and then provide places where you can put comparisons from column A and column B, that's fine. But, very few, let me put it this way. If you were kind of trying to do the de-Baathification and rebuilding of Iraqi civil society, you say, who do we have who's really good on this kind of stuff? But they have to be people from who studied Vietnam. You think, well, that's kind of stupid, right? I mean, Iraq and Vietnam are just very different countries. Right. Afghanistan and Vietnam are very different countries. And we all understand in our bones the problem with generals fighting the last war. And that's a real problem, right? It's like you are institutionalized. You have your priors are set by your experience. So it's a real problem, and it's also just a part of the human condition. I get it. But we seem to think that that's not true for intelligence analysts, TV show hosts, pundits, columnists. podcast bros, right? And it's also true of them. And so my only point is, yeah, I get it. Faulty intelligence. We can have faulty intelligence on both sides. We've had faulty intelligence in every single military conflict in American history,
Sure.
because faulty intelligence is part of the equation of gathering intelligence. And we've had dishonest politicians since the word politician has existed. So, like, that's a thing, too. But my point is, if you're just going around looking for this to be like Iraq, that is going to constrain your understanding of the scenario, of the situation, in ways that are not helpful, whether you're pro-bombing Iran or anti-bombing Iran. Because it's just, Iran is not Iraq. Iran's a much bigger, richer, more serious country. And the idea of occupying it is, no one's talking about that except the people who are trying to scare us out of doing something about Iran. They say, oh, it's like Iraq again, because they want you to think we're going to send 250,000 troops to occupy Iran, which nobody is talking about.
Right. Yeah. You do get to the point where you impose this framework, and then people look to fill in the gaps based on those parallels. I think that's an entirely fair point. On the other hand, Mike, if you look at what J.D. Vance was saying in his appearances on the Sunday shows, this is not a regime change. We're not talking about regime change. Nobody's talking about regime change. We should be clear. This is a quick in and out. We said we were going to hit the nuke sites. We're going to take them out, and then we're done. And then they can figure it out. We're not interested in regime change. Literally, that didn't last 6 hours. Donald Trump tweeted later that afternoon, regime change, the phrase is a little politically incorrect, but why wouldn't we want to change regimes there? MIGA, make Iran great again. We talked about this a little bit with the group earlier this week that we had to talk about this. Where do we stand on this question of regime change? Is it still being debated in the administration? Does it seem like this is something that we're likely to see the Trump administration push after having ruled it out early?
I mean, whatever I tell you could change between the time we're recording and the time this posts. This is the problem with the way that this has been conducted. Is really, since even before Israel's first strike, now going on nearly 2 weeks ago, even before that, there was a sense that the president was sticking his finger up in the air and trying to see where the wind was blowing. Could he get in the right position? Was he going? He didn't love getting involved in this, but once he saw that Israel had really struck quite a blow, like, get out in front of this parade and say, I've been leading it the whole time. Right. Was he annoyed by hearing J.D. Vance say no regime change and thought, I'm the one who makes these determinations, and so I'll zag where J.D. zigged, if only to assert my dominance and the decision making? Or does he does he actually have a slightly more sophisticated view? Think, why would I close that option off for me? I don't know. And I feel it seems to me that everybody in the administration is just trying to play catch up to where Donald Trump is at any exact any specific moment. But the question of regime change, I mean, like with the intelligence for these strikes and whether or not the blows were as effective or as obliterative, if that's a word, as Donald Trump has claimed, I think we just have to see. These last couple of years have revealed to the world that Iran, as a strong military power in the region, it was a facade, or was a bit of a mirage, or was something of, I won't use the phrase paper tiger, but it's been that idea has sort of crumbled a bit as its proxies have been destroyed or decimated, and as its responses to these kinds of things have been seen as pretty pathetic. We don't know internally what things are like, as Jonah said, in Iran. the analysts are going, many of whom I trust and read, to figure out what's going on. They have a general idea. There is opposition to the regime. It seems to be split. And maybe they hate each other, the different opposition groups, more than they hate the regime. The regime is weaker to us on the outside than we thought. Perhaps it's weaker now to the opposition groups than they had previously thought. Go back to the economic riots from a couple of years ago. I mean, there's all kinds of indications that something like that could happen. And so my question is, what does Donald Trump do if he does see an opportunity? If there is a moment like the Israeli bombing that makes it seem like he could be somebody who gets in front of the parade and says, yeah, I did lead the regime change in Iran, if it looks like it could be good. I think that's the situation that we're in now, and it doesn't give me a lot of comfort, but as analysis, I think we're all just watching it the same as Donald Trump and seeing which way the wind blows.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. The only thing I'd push back on a little bit is, 2 points I'd make. One is, Iran has been really good at murdering and imprisoning people who could lead democracy movements, uprisings, that kind of stuff domestically. They're also really good at, removing the eyes of young women who don't wear a hijab or throwing acid in their face, right? So, and someone in The Economist was making this point, is that the economy's been so bad for so long that there's a profound amount of alienation, and people are just trying to look after themselves and their own families, and there's less of the sort of civil society connectivity that you need to get like a solidarity movement. I think it's a very depressing thing. I wish it were otherwise, but I am more skeptical that we're going to get that kind of, Iranian Persian Spring than I would like. And the second point, it's worth just putting a pin, closing the loop on this. When they were grilling when Welker was grilling Vance on Meet the Press about has the intelligence changed about the imminence of how close they are to a bomb, the answer he should have given is, that's not the relevant intelligence. The relevant intelligence is people have talked about doing this for 30 years, but in the past, the intelligence said it would be too difficult because Hezbollah and Hamas would be activated and they would attack Israel and our allies in the region, and they would attack our bases. And because Fordo was too well protected and Iranian anti-aircraft systems were too sophisticated, that it wasn't worth trying if you couldn't succeed. So the intelligence that changed, we saw on TV. Israel took out Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel took out basically the entire anti-aircraft system in Iran, so that all of the scenarios about how to do this had assumed that we wouldn't, or that Israel wouldn't have complete air dominance. And now the intelligence is Israel has complete air dominance. And so what was once a really difficult attack is now a much more difficult, much more different proposition. And so it doesn't, again, I could not care less about how close to a bomb they were as a justification for doing this, because the second they have one, it's too late. And if you know that they're developing one, if you know that they actually believe what they say, which is death to America, if you know that they are committed to literally murdering 6 million Jews in Israel, and you say, well, you can't go after their system until you're sure they're about to have a bomb. What the hell is that? This is actual nuclear anti-proliferation stuff, not all the cookie pushing, stuff at the State Department and clever conversations in Geneva or in hotel lobbies around clever cheese. This is like actually how we're stopping a real bad actor from getting a nuclear bomb, and it may not have been successful. Yeah. But it's just, the Iraq syndrome thing is weird, and this obsession with the procedures of disarmament and statecraft, and we left the JCPOA and all these kinds of things. It's like they care more about the paperwork than what the paperwork is supposed to achieve. And what it's supposed to achieve is stopping Iran from getting a bomb. Hopefully this worked. I don't know if it did. It may not have, which is why I was nervous about this happening. Is like it only makes sense to do if it's successful. If it's not successful, it makes things worse, and that may be the case. Don't know. But the intelligence that changed is the one that's obvious in front of everybody's eyes.
Yeah, I think the problem is reporters, journalists didn't have any. They had to ask these questions because of the way that both Netanyahu and Trump made the case over the past month, right? I mean, they were saying, Netanyahu was saying, look, the imminence argument is now upon us, that we're here, in effect. We've been warning about this, now we're here. And Trump adopted that argument repeatedly, and it was in tension with the kinds of things that DNI Tulsi Gabbard was saying in her congressional testimony, whether the Trump administration will admit it or not. I think there was a very good case to say we can't get to the point where it's imminent. We can't wait to that point. That's why we need to do what we need to do. And as you say, Jonah, the changes on the ground are what provides this opportunity.
We can only kill that snake when it's really close to biting your kid. When it's just like 5 feet away, you can't do it. Right. That would be outrageous.
Right. So we need to switch to our second topic here, which is the New York City mayoral race. So a few weeks ago on this podcast, during our Not Worth Your Time segment, we discussed Zoran Mamdani, who was the Democratic Socialist mayoral candidate in New York City, who had proposed, among other things, socializing the grocery stores in New York City, having city-run grocery stores. I think we all got a good chuckle about that. It was a fun and entertaining discussion. And he has now won the Democratic primary in New York City. And that may not be, I would say, that is not his most radical proposal for governance of New York City. Jonah, you are a longtime New York City resident. You've watched its politics for decades. What does it mean that he prevailed here, both in terms of what it tells us about the voters, but also in terms of what it might mean for the subsequent general election and the possibility that he will be mayor? Yeah,
so first of all, great news for the Florida real estate market. You're going to see a lot of people kicking the tires on getting the hell out of Dodge. That's if he actually looks like he'll become mayor. Let's back up. What he did was really impressive. This was ranked choice voting with a lot of different people on the ballot, and he got a near, what was the number? 46%. It was like near a majority. It was decisive.
43.5, I think.
Okay, so he crushed Cuomo, and these numbers won't mean a lot to everybody out there, but just directionally, I think it's interesting. So, Upper West Side, where I am from, Cuomo won by 4 points. Upper East Side, Cuomo plus 16. And then Bedford-Stuyvesant, Mamdani, plus 43. Crown Heights, plus 25. Astoria, plus 52. Williamsburg, plus 33. Bushwick, plus 66. I mean, he just racked up massive numbers in these places in a huge turnout.
And what are the differences if you're not familiar with New York City? I lived there for a year. Upper East Side, Upper West Side.
Upper East Side and Upper West Side. I know everyone wants to think they're just all Jewish, but they're not. But a lot of Jews, but also just a lot of upscale New Yorkers up there. And then those other neighborhoods, there's a lot of difference between them. Obviously Harlem is blacker than Chelsea, but the rest of those neighborhoods are higher numbers of young, minority, lower middle class people, right? And that's where his strengths were. And so Cuomo, I believe, still has the ability to run in the fall because he maintained status on another ballot line, another party line. And Eric Adams, the current, I'll just say it, I'll throw it in for you, journalist stickler guys. Allegedly corrupt mayor of New York, Eric Adams, is running as an independent. He apparently will have pretty solid support with the African American community still. So in a multi-way race, a plurality wins, so that could still matter. But Cuomo may not actually run. He was so shellacked here and so humiliated. So I don't know where that plays out. What I do think is that, first of all, it is amazing to me the degree to which New York looks at Chicago and says, I got to get in on that action. And decides to lean into the dumbest kind of hard left politics.
Because Chicago's mayor, Brandon Johnson, is equally radical.
Equally radical. It's completely screwing up the city. Lots of, I don't even say white flight, I just middle class flight, right? And we're at a moment where, because of Zoom and email and electronic trading and 1,000 other things, the need to be physically in New York is less than it has ever been. And you got this guy who is, I'm not, John Podhoretz will make a very passionate case, our friend, editor, commentary, that he is a straight up anti-Semite. But you have to do it in like 4 steps to get there. And so I'm not going to bother with all that. He is passionately anti-Israel. He's also a defund the police guy. On October 8th, so the day after the October 7th terrorist attacks, while Jews were still being killed in Israel, and they hadn't actually found, they hadn't finished putting away the hostages yet. Mamdani put out a statement condemning Israel for its attack on Gaza, with no mention of the attack on Israel. That's the kind of guy he started at Bowdoin College, of all places, the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. He's he is a campus radical occupier type who's charming and has a good Instagram account, who has profoundly stupid ideas about economics, and no experience on how to run a government or an administration. And it looks like he's got a non-trivial, like 50-50 chance of being the next mayor of New York City. And that, I think, will be disastrous for New York City. And also, I should point out to our friends who are more on the sort of bulwarky side of anti-Trump stuff, this is fantastic news for the Trump administration. That they will have a sort of Muslim version of AOC, who's a defund the police guy and pro Palestine, pro Gaza, pro Hamas demonstrator type, who wants socialist grocery stores and free public transportation and rent freezes and all of these things. As they will have him as a straw man, as a human straw man, as a whipping boy, as a poster boy. It is like the Democratic Party has a death wish, and that also, like, New York City has a death wish.
Yeah, Mike, I want to get to the broader implications for Democrats, because I think Mamdani did some things that were very unconventional as he campaigned. Some of them turned out to have worked. I mean, this was a successful campaign, and I think National Democrats would do well to pay attention to some of the particulars. But I want to read, speaking of John Podhoretz, something that he tweeted out about Mamdani's campaign political director, just to give people a sense of just how radical this sort of world is here. The political director tweeted out the following about Luigi Mangione, who was the assassin of the CEO of United Healthcare. He wrote, Mangione is one of the few entities not rejected online, which is considering how harmful he deems social media. And while his remarkable good looks hardly hurt, anyone who thinks his acclaim is rooted primarily in aesthetics is missing the point, probably on purpose. He's adored not only because he dared to target a leader of one of the most vile, self-enriching industries darkening our society today, but because he dared to defy the stasis of nihilistic rejection. The question is not whether he was right or wrong, it's how many others he has shaken loose. Here you have, I don't think you need to do a lot of deep interpreting. Here you have somebody who's a top advisor to the person who just won the Democratic primary, and to whom many Democrats are saying, hey, look to this guy. This is who we should be listening to. This is who we should emulate. His political director, in effect, justifying and rationalizing the assassination of a CEO. Is it unfair for
and
John?
Unwilling to take a side about the question of right or wrong, right?
Right
I mean,
and
just
wrong. Yeah. Incredible thing to say. Is it unfair for us to look at that and say, boy, this is, when you combine that with some of his policy views, this is a massive step in a truly radical direction in New York City, and potentially for Democrats more broadly.
Yes, potentially that could be the case. I can't recall exactly how you framed your question, but let me start by saying that the first thing I thought of when I saw this on Tuesday night, and the sort of shock you were hearing from kind of center-left Democrats that this happened, anger at Andrew Cuomo, we could talk about that, but all of these things was, it reminded me a lot of how Republicans were talking in the run-up to Donald Trump in 2013, 2014. There's a parallel. I mean, the parallels are hard to make cleanly, but it reminded me a bit of the way that Eric Cantor, who was at the time the majority leader in the House of Representatives, was knocked off by a pretty radical Tea Party, who would eventually kind of morph into a populist Trump type.
Dave Bratt was his name.
Dave
Ran
Bratt
on
was his name.
immigration. Yeah,
he ran on immigration, not on like Tea Party stuff, but that was all muddled back then. And just the sort of rising tide on the right, where people were tolerating and sort of even cheering on things that were sort of horrifying. And I see a lot of that in Mamdani's victory, and the people surrounding him, the people supporting him, and the things that he's endorsed, the things that he proposes for the city of New York. A couple of cautions I would say is I don't know, not because it's not possible, but it just remains to be seen whether or not Mamdani is a Brandon Johnson. This is the mayor of Chicago, the full bore, progressive person of the public sector unions. He's their sort of champion, and who is, by the way, extremely unpopular in Chicago right now. And is running that city extremely poorly. I think it remains to be seen whether that's Mamdani in reality or if this is a pose. We have to take seriously what he's said, what he's proposed. On the other hand, he still has to win a general election. This was a Democratic primary. I'll be interested to see if he does feel the need to moderate, particularly if Adams really lays into him on some of the defund the police stuff, which, by the way, a lot of that stuff that Mamdani said was from back in 2020 when this was very in vogue in Democratic circles, and it's very not in vogue now. And he did not really talk about this in his campaign. Mamdani focused a lot on economics and making things more affordable. So all of that is to say, I don't disagree with Jonah's concern about what this might mean for New York and what it might mean for the Democratic Party. I kind of want to wait and see how the rest of this election goes. What is Curtis Sliwa, who is I guess he's the Republican, and maybe has the Conservative Party line as well, as the founder of the Guardian Angels. What does he do? Does he stay in this or do a lot of his voters, to stop Mamdani, go with Adams as the better, more electable choice? I don't know. I think we haven't talked about this, but if you want to point the blame at people, point the blame at Andrew Cuomo and the Democratic Party establishment that rallied around him, knowing everything about all of the baggage that Andrew Cuomo brought to this, the disdain that Andrew Cuomo seemed to have for campaigning for the job, a job that he didn't even really seem to want. I mean, say this for Zohran Mamdani, he ran like he wanted to win, and guess what? Yeah. He won. Like all of that sort of stuff. It's the same way that people denigrate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I personally find her politics, distasteful and nothing close to mine. But she's really good at politicking and at running and winning elections. And you do have to wonder, at what point do legacy establishment Democratic Party types realize they've got to kind of wake up to modernity here, and you can't just lean on, I'm a Cuomo and I've done this all before, and step aside, and you're not gonna vote for this crazy guy. Well, it turns out the crazy guy who went and knocked on people's doors and
crazy guys are so hot
city.
These days.
Exactly, they really are.
Jonah, how did just before we wrap up, pick up on Mike's point about Andrew Cuomo? How in the world was Andrew Cuomo the default choice of the sort of establishment centrist Democrats? And do you think that Mamdani is now the front runner to be the next mayor of New York?
Yeah, I think. I would not have predicted that I wouldn't have been surprised if he won, but I thought it would be much closer, go to a second round, all that kind of stuff. I thought we'd be surprised that it became a two-person race kind of thing. But like, the Democratic Party of New York is a mess, but it's still a one-party town, so it matters that you're the nominee of the Democratic Party. I take all of Mike's points are well taken. There's another aspect of this that I think is worth just keeping in mind. A lot of the stuff Mamdani talks about doing, first of all, can't work, and I mean that as a conservative who believes in Friedrich Hayek and all that kind of stuff. Like, we know that rent freezes do not have the desired effect, right? All those kinds of things. But more importantly, many of the things that he's proposing are things a mayor cannot do, right? And this is one of my problems with, I've written this column many times now about how Republicans and Democrats talk about how when they're running for president in primaries, they talk about all these things they're going to do on day one that are literally unconstitutional and impossible to do on day one, if at all, right? Kamala Harris, when she was running, she would talk about how on day one, we're going to repeal Donald Trump's tax cuts. On day one, we're going to get the guns, all this kind of stuff. Really? Day one, huh? Like, you got 8 hours, you're going to get this done? Like, what are you going to get through Congress? What bill are you going to repeal? It's not possible, right? And that's part of my problem with the incredibly stupid times we live in, is that politicians talk about stuff that sound awesome. We're going to give everybody free ice cream and it's going to make you lose weight. It's like, okay, that sounds awesome. It's like, we don't know how to do that and we can't do that. And so it is not necessarily that he's going to turn, that if he wins and he turns that he's going to turn New York City into Pyongyang or something, right? That's not my concern. But he will fail. And one of the lessons we have learned in our politics these days is that when populists fail, and they fail often, they never say, gosh, my ideas were wrong. What they say is, oh, the deep state, the Jews, or the billionaires, or whoever it is.
Just a generic they.
They stopped me from doing all of these things that would be so easy, right? Trump always goes around saying, oh, it'd be so easy to do all of these things. And then when he fails, he says, they stopped me. Bernie Sanders says it'd be so easy to do all of this, nationalize the means of production. But the only thing stopping us are these millionaires and billionaires that are to stop us from doing these things that would work and would make you richer and happier, and that fuels even more populist resentment, distrust in institutions, because populist demagogues are incapable of admitting they were wrong, because to do that for a populist means that you're also admitting that the people who voted for you were wrong, and that is just not the business model.
So we're going to wrap up with a not worth your time that may or may not be related to the stupid politics that Jonah mentioned right now, the frustrating moment, and the fraught debates we're having nationally. Do you, either of you all, have a new drink for the summer? Do you find yourself, when you're at the end of the day, or Jonah, first thing in the morning, trying something new? Or are you just going to your old standbys?
I mean, this is a loaded question, so to speak. The readers may know that I wrote about tiki cocktails for the Dispatch a couple of months ago, and so far I have been, every time I've gone down to my home bar to make something, I've been trying to make something I haven't made before. So I've been making a lot of new fun, festive tiki drinks for me and my wife. And right now, the drink that's jumping out to me is, I've been making several different versions of the Zombie, which is a classic tiki cocktail. And
what's in a zombie?
It depends. I mean, this is the joy of making these. I'm in particular a fan of one of the originals, and I'm going to pull up the recipe right here on my phone. One of the original recipes from Don the Beachcomber, and he used lime juice, lemon juice, pineapple juice, passion fruit syrup, 3 different kinds of rum, bitters, sugar syrup, shake it with crushed ice, pour it in a tall glass, garnish it with mint. And as every tiki restaurant and bar has on their menu, every customer is limited to 2 because they're quite strong.
Jonah?
So when it comes to my choice hard alcohols, no. In part because, well, occasionally I'll like, a Mai Tai kind of like fruity kind of thing. I'm not a big sweets guy, sugary guy, and so like sugary drinks are a special occasion thing for me. That said, I have, and I don't know if I'm supposed to be embarrassed about this or not, but I've been on
you.
Yeah, I'm sure, but I'm not sure I trust your assessment.
Yes, you should be.
I know he's already judged me.
I find I'm drinking more rosé, which I think it's a good cold summer wine.
Rosé can be good. Yes.
Oh yeah.
And particularly this is like, last night we had massive, fantastic steaks, but for the most part we're eating lighter. Summer, it's so friggin' hot in DC, and like rosé with seafood and stuff, it's just great. And it's and you don't feel guilty drinking it, the way I do with milk glasses full of scotch.
That's just a good image. Mine, I don't really drink hard alcohol either, or rarely. I'm much more just a wine guy now. And I agree with you, Jonah. Rosé is good. A good crisp Sauvignon Blanc, I think, is good. The surprising entry, though, for me is an Orange Crush, which we made for a graduation party a few weeks ago. Seemed to have gone over pretty well. Not sure really how to make them, but we just guessed. And I've since paid a little more attention to Orange Crushes and learned that Orange Crush was, I think, voted on by the Maryland State Legislature and made the state drink of Maryland, and it seems really to be a thing. My question to you guys, and I really genuinely don't know the answer to this: Is it the case that Orange Crush has been sort of a mid-Atlantic Maryland thing for a long time, or is this one of these fatty things that just became a thing recently and now everybody seems to be doing it?
My very quick research on this, which amounts to going to Wikipedia and looking up what's in an Orange Crush, suggests it was invented 30 years ago in Ocean City, Maryland. And
so it really is a Maryland.
It really,
thing.
truly is a mid-Atlantic Maryland. Apparently, this is all from Wikipedia. There's a debate about whether it was John Carney, the governor of Delaware, at one point said that it was made more famous and, quote, perfected in Dewey Beach, Delaware. And so is it more of a Delaware? I mean,
it's also the official state cocktail of Delaware.
Right.
I'm learning now, too.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't get more mid-Atlantic and also kind of like low-grade, silly and pathetic than like a fight between Maryland and Delaware.
About shore drinks. Yeah.
About what they drink at the shore. Yeah. No,
I did find it refreshing. You can load it with ice, which I liked because it's so.
It's a great REM song too, Orange Crush.
And it was the term referring to the 1970s Denver Broncos strong defensive unit.
That is definitely true, and you could also make an argument that it's what
just knew that. Off the top of his head.
Well, when you Google Orange Crush, you read all the results.
Who were the members of that?
I couldn't possibly tell you.
It also could be a description of what Donald Trump did on Saturday in Iran.
There you
go. Operation Orange Crush would have been awesome.
With that, it's too early to have one now, but we hope that you're staying cool wherever you are. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dispatch Podcast. We'll be back with you soon.